So, Michael, this idea of dehumanization being like a pathology for the US, what does that really mean, it sounds pretty intense.
It is intense, Chloe. And Shahid Bolson, the scholar we're talking about today, he really drives this point home. He frames it almost as a core dysfunction. It's not just an isolated incident, right? It's a systemic pattern where if the U.S. wants or needs something you possess, whether it's land, labor, resources, whatever, they'll often resort to deeming you less than human. It's a way to, morally justify anything they do to take it.
So basically, it's like a psychological bypass to avoid feeling guilty about exploiting people?
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. He talks about how they need you to not be human so they can morally justify all the cruelty and brutality they inflict, to exploit you, to use you, to pillage whatever you have that they want. It's almost like if you're not fully human, then you don't deserve human rights or dignity or ownership over your own things. And that's a dangerous, dangerous path for any nation to consistently tread. It removes any internal conflict for the aggressor, which is honestly kind of chilling when you think about it.
Wow. And he brings up slavery, comparing it to like slavery in the Muslim world, and says American slavery was uniquely despicable. I thought slavery was just slavery.
That's a common misconception, but Bolson really clarifies it. The key difference, he argues, is the subhuman status that was explicitly assigned to enslaved Africans in America. While slavery was awful everywhere, in many other cultures, like in the Muslim world he referenced, enslaved people could actually rise to positions of power, even higher socioeconomic status than their masters. The slave and owner might even be considered brothers under certain religious frameworks. But in America, the enslaved person was legally, ideologically, and socially branded as a beast of burden, not just an enemy, but literally not human. It was a sadistic beastmaster relationship, right? That fundamental dehumanization was crucial for the entire system to function. It wasn't just a difference in practice, it was a difference in inherent belief about the very nature of the enslaved.
So they needed to make them not human so they could say all men are created equal on one hand, but then own people on the other without, contradicting themselves too much?
Precisely. They had to invent this idea, this whole pseudo-scientific, pseudo-moral justification that, well, they're not fully human, so therefore it doesn't count. It wasn't a violation of their principles to treat these beasts of burden as unequal. By dehumanizing themselves, they convinced themselves that chattel slavery didn't contradict their claims of virtue, their grand ideals of freedom and equality for all. It's a profound hypocrisy that needed a profound and frankly grotesque form of dehumanization to sustain itself for centuries. It's really the foundation of a lot of what we still see today.
That's chilling. And it wasn't just about labor, right? He mentioned Native Americans being dehumanized for the richness beneath their feet, for their land. Their cultures were erased, their sacred lands violated. That's a huge, huge thing to unpack.
Absolutely, Chloe. The same pattern of dehumanization applied directly to indigenous populations. It wasn't about wanting their labor, but their land, which was seen as richness beneath their feet. To justify taking it, to push them to the margins, erase their cultures, violate their sacred spaces, they had to first strip them of their humanity. If they're savages or primitive, then taking their land and resources becomes a morally justifiable act of progress or destiny, right? It's all part of America's insatiable, ruthless hunger for more, for expansion, for dominance. It's a continuum of the same pathology, just applied to different groups for different desired assets.
And he mentioned Latin Americans too, their natural resources were sought after, their sovereignty trampled. So it's not just a historical thing, but something that extended throughout the Western Hemisphere?
Exactly. This wasn't, a one-off event. It's a deeply embedded tradition, a habit.
From Mexico to Central and South America, the pattern repeated. Their natural resources were sought and their sovereignty was trampled upon. America's pursuit of what it desires has consistently been characterized by exploitation, domination, and subjugation. It speaks to a fundamental belief system that doesn't understand coexistence, peace, or mutual harmony. It's almost like a zero-sum aim in their mindset, where if someone else has it and they want it, they must take it. And the moral justification comes through stripping the other of their inherent worth. It's a self-serving narrative, really.
It really is a self-serving narrative, yeah. And then he says that for all their talk about capitalism and the free market, that's not what they practice, not what they fundamentally believe. He called it barbarism and piracy. I mean, that's a pretty heavy accusation for, a global economic system.
It is, and it challenges the very core of how America presents itself. Bolson argues that for the U.S. elite, capitalism boils down to we make the money, we make the profit, we benefit, everything is ours, and nothing is yours. That's not free exchange or fair transaction. That's pure conquest. You can't go into a business deal or a negotiation with that kind of mentality, right? That's the mindset you have when you commit a bank robbery, not a business agreement. It completely removes the idea of mutual benefit, which they apparently see as some kind of loss for them. It's a very predatory, singular view of economic interaction, devoid of genuine partnership or reciprocal growth.
So they just don't understand the idea of a win-win then? Or they just don't believe in it?
They either don't know how, or they simply don't believe in peaceful, equitable transactions. Mutual benefit represents a loss to them. They're not looking for harmonious relations or fair exchange. Their default is conquest. It's about what they can take, what they can gain, not what can be built together. America was, after all, built on stolen land and sustained by stolen labor. That sets a very specific precedent for its approach to the world, and it created a long-standing habit of dehumanizing anyone who possesses what it desires. This isn't just about economics. It's about a deep-seated cultural and historical pattern of predatory behavior disguised by rhetoric of freedom and market principles. And that's why this perception of capitalism is so problematic for Bolson.
It's a tough picture to paint for sure. But then, if they're acting like pirates, why do they keep, pushing this narrative of being good and enlightened? Like, why the self-deception?
That's the core psychological pathology Bolson highlights. They can't admit to themselves that they're glorified pirates or mafiosos or marauders. They have this deep-seated need to believe they're good, righteous, enlightened, civilized people who, genuinely believe all men are created equal. So the only way they can reconcile their barbaric instincts, their history of conquest and exploitation with this self-perception of goodness is by dehumanizing everyone else. If the people they're exploiting aren't really human, then it doesn't count, right? Their actions don't violate their own supposed moral principles. It's a massive cognitive dissonance that's resolved through an externalized perpetual othering process.
So it's not even purely about greed sometimes. It's also about maintaining their own self-image.
Absolutely. It's not just about the tangible gains, it's also about the intangible need to feel virtuous. They needed to dehumanize enslaved Africans and Native Americans to claim freedom for all while simultaneously denying it to so many. They couldn't face the contradiction, and this habit, this tradition has continued. It extends beyond their borders and, frankly, it's now being turned inwards. The very elites who perfected this system globally are starting to apply it to their own citizens, treating them as a subcategory of the human race to be exploited and disposed of. It's a vicious cycle, born of a refusal to truly civilize and confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. And that's a central tenet of the Western psyche, he argues, developed through their own peculiar history and culture.
That's a really bleak assessment, Michael. If this is like a core pathology, how does it play out on the global stage? Because America does, dominate a lot of international relations.
Well, Bolson asserts that the U.S. is the only country in the world that genuinely believes that control over the entire planet is vital to its national interest. Imagine that level of ambition. They don't understand coexistence, peace, or harmony in international relations. Their approach is built on a last man standing philosophy. It's a Western motto, he argues, born from their unique historical experience. But it's not a universal truth. In fact, most nations aren't like that. He explicitly calls this American model abnormal, pathological, and sick. It's a huge disconnect between how the U.S. sees its role and how the vast majority of the world views proper international conduct. They don't see it as, a matter of mutual benefit or equal transactions. It's about establishing and maintaining unquestioned supremacy.
So they just expect everyone else to kowtow and be pushed around then?
Pretty much. It's a deeply entrenched belief that everyone else just has to kowtow and be exploited and pushed around, doing as they're told. They genuinely believe there's no other way for international relations to be carried out except through hegemonic power. And that's not correct. It's not how the world has to operate. He contrasts this sharply with, say, China's approach, which is more compatible with the historic Muslim approach, one of harmony, mutual benefit, bilateral and multilateral cooperation. They don't see another's prosperity as a threat to their own. This mutual benefit approach is what Bolson views as good business sense, distinct from the predatory, war-driven economic model that has, until recently, underpinned much of American foreign policy. It's a fundamental difference in philosophy, Chloe.
Okay, so there's this clash of philosophies. But if America's approach is so abnormal, why is it still so influential? And he mentioned the military-industrial complex creating a monster, but that the monster is now redundant. Can you break that down?
Absolutely. For decades, the U.S. economy was heavily war-driven. The military-industrial complex was the primary engine, shaping policy and guaranteeing profit. But things have changed dramatically. Manufacturing as a percentage of the U.S. economy has declined considerably since Eisenhower first warned us about the MIC. Today, the vast majority of American manufacturing isn't even connected to the military. This means other business sectors, those that don't necessarily benefit from war or that could even be harmed by war, now have greater influence. The domestic economic dynamics have shifted, and with the rise in globalization of private sector capital, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital are no longer tied exclusively to American prosperity. That old motto of, domination and subjugation isn't as appealing anymore, because the profit motive has diversified beyond just conflict. It's like an old device that can't support a software upgrade.
So the old guard, like the neocons, are still pushing for war, but the economic landscape has actually, moved on from them.
Precisely. The MIC effectively created this monster, the neocons in Washington, whose policy proposals invariably involve bombing. But that monster is now redundant, obsolete, even a liability. They're like dinosaurs who can't adapt to the new political and economic landscapes. They're still calling for war with Iran, for example, but Bolson suggests the real power brokers, the globalized capital interests, don't want that war. They see it as bad for business, for their broader, diversified global portfolios. So you have this incredibly comical situation where Washington is left trying to appease these dying wishes of the neocons by, say, attacking Iranian assets outside of Iran, just for show, while pleading, please don't retaliate, we don't mean it. It's a clear sign that the old system is breaking down, unable to adapt, and clinging to outdated destructive instincts.
Wow, that sounds almost desperate on their part, doesn't it? So these dinosaurs, like Victoria Nuland, as he said, are still trying to push their agenda, but they're being, put in check?
Yeah, exactly. They're definitely getting put in check. The global power dynamics have fundamentally changed, and the US is now being forced to try and adapt, which is an entirely new experience for them. And they're adapting badly, frankly, because again, it's just not in their nature. They're offended at any constraints on their belligerence. They're indignant at the idea that the whole world shouldn't just offer them tribute and gratefully subordinate themselves to American power. It simply doesn't compute in their minds. This is a habit of thinking that predates their actual global power, and having that power just made it worse, reinforcing those old predatory instincts. They've had the ability to impose their will around the world, so they never had to civilize. They don't possess any internal motivation to do so, and they never did.
So it's almost like they got too comfortable with being the, unchallenged bully on the playground, and now they don't know how to play nice.
Precisely. And because of this inability to update their software, their mentality, they're gradually being sidelined. The global elite, the very people who traditionally supported American power for their own profit, are now abandoning this outdated model. They're becoming increasingly incapable of civilizing. They're so used to getting their way through force that the idea of mutual benefit or true cooperation is foreign. So America is being left behind, and it's starting to dawn on them, but I think they're still largely in denial. They can't face the fact that their historical method of relating to the world through domination and dehumanization is no longer viable or acceptable. This deep-seated pathology is now confronting a world that's, quite frankly, moved on from tolerating such behavior.
So the US is in denial, but the world isn't just sitting around, right? He said BRICS is almost performing an intervention. What does that look like in practice?
Bolson uses that analogy of an intervention for an alcoholic or drug addict, and is quite apt. The U.S. is reaching rock bottom in terms of its global credibility and its ability to act unilaterally without consequence. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now the new members, they're performing this intervention. They're forcing the U.S. to see what they really are, to face the reality of a multipolar world where American hegemony is no longer unchallenged. It means pushing for alternative financial systems, challenging dollar dominance, fostering trade routes that bypass traditional Western control, and insisting on genuinely equitable partnerships. They're showing the U.S. that there are other ways to conduct international relations that benefit multiple parties, not just one hegemon. It's about demonstrating the practical utility of mutual benefit and multilateral cooperation, not just making moral appeals.
So it's not about trying to be moral or anything, but just showing them that their old ways aren't actually good for business anymore.
Exactly. From a purely practical business perspective, waging war on a country means only certain segments of your economy benefit. Weapons companies, reconstruction industries, but huge segments of the economy actually suffer. To an average Chinese business person, for example, casualty figures from a war in Iraq aren't just humanitarian tragedies. They're that many more people who will not be customers that we could have sold to. Dead people don't go shopping, right? It's not good business sense. So BRICS and other emerging powers are illustrating that cooperation, trade, and shared development are far more profitable than endless conquest and war. They're essentially telling the U.S. your old methods are inefficient, costly, and ultimately self-defeating. This is the checkmate, Chloe, forcing them to confront the real-world consequences of their pathology beyond just the moral arguments.
So what does this reckoning mean for America in the long run? Do you think they can actually dial back from dehumanizing whole nations, whole populations, and then expect to be treated, in a normal way?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Bolson implies it's incredibly difficult to dial back from such deeply ingrained habits. How do you get that out of your own mind, and how do you get it out of their minds about you? This dysfunction is plaguing America's relations with the rest of the planet. Europe, he suggests, is like that last friend of a drug addict who sticks by them until the addict steals from them, lies, and betrays them. Eventually, they'll lose even that friend. America's smoking all its friends down to the filter, as that song goes. The reckoning is coming, and it's going to be hard. By the time it comes, the world will have already moved on. The path to recovery for the U.S. isn't just about economic or military adjustments. It's about a profound internal shift, a civilizing process they've frankly avoided for centuries due to their unchecked power.
So it's about humility, essentially, and having to earn back respect instead of just demanding it?
Precisely. It's about facing what they really are and how they really are. It's forcing them to see the way they're going to have to be if they want to recover any kind of respectable role in the world. Until now, the U.S. has been in denial, incapable of updating their mentality, incapable of civilizing. They haven't had the internal motivation to do so because they could always impose their will. But that era is ending. The combined historical scale, enduring legacy, cultural representation, and ongoing social issues surrounding slavery and exploitation all contribute to the current predicament. The prominence of America's historical acts, from slavery to geopolitical interventions, ensures that this legacy remains a key part of global discussions on race and justice. The world is changing, and the U.S. is being challenged to either adapt to an equitable multilateral framework or risk being permanently sidelined. It's a defining moment, I think, for their place in history. Hopefully, they choose the former.
That's a powerful thought, Michael. For a nation so defined by its self-image as exceptional, how does that internal shift even begin? It sounds like an identity crisis on a global scale.
It absolutely is, Chloe. Bolison argues this is deep-seated psychology, not just political. Their inability to civilize stems from never needing to. They've always externalized moral contradictions through dehumanization. To truly adapt, they must dismantle that entire self-serving narrative, a painful process threatening their very identity.
So the world is forcing them to look in a mirror they've avoided for centuries. What happens if they refuse to see what's reflected back?
If they refuse, they risk irrelevance. Global capital and the world majority are moving towards mutual benefit and multilateral cooperation. If the U.S. can't engage on those terms, they'll be bypassed. Influence will wane, economically, culturally, politically. It's a stark choice. Adapt to a new reality or cling to an outdated fantasy, with severe consequences.
Wow, Michael, that's certainly a lot to ponder. It sounds like America is at a truly critical juncture, forced to confront a history of behavior that's, frankly, pretty uncomfortable. But it's essential, isn't it?
Absolutely, Chloe. Bosun's insights highlight that this isn't just a political or economic shift. It's a deep reckoning with a core identity. The path forward demands an unprecedented level of introspection and a genuine willingness to adapt to a world that's no longer willing to tolerate unchecked power and dehumanization.
Well, it's been an incredibly insightful and thought-provoking discussion today, Michael. Thank you so much for breaking down these complex ideas for us. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us.
It's been my pleasure, Chloe. These are vital conversations, and I appreciate you bringing them to our audience.